Hello, I hope you're doing well. This is an updated video all about my reading journal. It's gonna be a pretty chatty one, but I will try to keep it interesting. I think 2 years ago I made a video about this reading journal, and it's very similar. These are both Stalogy notebooks, the half-year version. I think they have like a full year version that's like double the size. Anyways, this was mine from like 2 years ago, and it is a dot grid notebook. I think the camera is having a hard time picking up the dot grid, and that is exactly why I stopped using this journal. I often read and do my personal journaling in the evening, and I have really bad eyesight, so I was struggling a lot with seeing where the dots are and writing straight. So yeah, I did enjoy this, but I had to stop midway through because I realized that just the little friction of not being able to see the dot grid, it actually discouraged me from reading because I knew that I would have to like really strain myself in order to write in here. Even though this notebook kind of went to waste, I'm glad that I made that decision because at least I'm reading more now. But I am still using it kind of as a random scratch pad. This was my outline for the workshop that I hosted in Toronto. Anyways, that's not what this video is about. After ditching that notebook, I still decided to stick to a Stalogy notebook just for consistency, I suppose. But instead, I went for their grid notebook. And I think the lightness of the line, it's still the same as the shade of gray in the dot grid, but because these are like all straight lines, I can see the grid a lot better. So yeah, I am enjoying this notebook a lot more than the dot grid. For the paper, the Stalogy, I do like it with fountain pens. It's supposed to be fountain pen friendly, but I would say it's not like a super high quality paper for fountain pens. There's quite a bit of feathering and bleeding at some points, but overall, like, I do like it and it's usable. About my overall setup, I have this like cardstock thing, and I stuck on an adhesive sticky pocket, which I will be restocking very shortly. I guess this one's finished, but I have the reading trackers, which is what I use for tracking all of the books that I read. And I am considering making a stamp version because it does get a little bit bulky, and I think it's like more economical if you can stamp that image. So anyways, that is all I have for the inner cover. I think here I wanted to do something, but it didn't work out, so I just like cut it out. I don't remember what I was doing, so there is that. I have this page, which is where I'm tracking all of the books that I have finished. Title, author, the category, and the rating. As you can see, I have not really kept up with filling this out. I do have a Goodreads account where I keep track of all of the books that I read, so I can go back and retroactively fill this out. But yeah, this is a very simple tracker that I made. A little bit of washi for decoration. This is my reading list, which is where I write down books that people have recommended me or things that I want to read in the future. So many books, so little time. It makes me really sad that in my lifetime, I will probably only read a few hundred books, and there are so many books that I want to read. Anyways, I don't want to get down about that today. But yeah, this and these two pages are the only really like decorative elements of my reading journal. Everything else is just writing. And I suppose this is where I can talk about like the different types of reading journals. I think there are a lot of different types of reading journals out there. Some are more decorative, scrapbooky, and artsy. Maybe the journal isn't so much about the contents of the book, but rather just like tracking the books that you read. On the other side, if you are wanting to start a journal for, I don't know, research or writing papers, learning, it's gonna be a lot more minimal and a lot more writing. I think mine is like right in the middle. I don't know if this will make sense to other people, but when I'm reading, I know that I'm not gonna be able to memorize and retain everything that I read. So it's not a big deal that I can't remember everything. However, if I come across like a beautiful passage or a quotation that speaks to me, or just like anything that's notable, I don't feel right just completely moving on from it. So that is where my journal comes in. Another way to put it is my reading journal is a place for me to archive things that I want to remember, even if I don't actually remember it. Also, just the act of writing helps me retain information, so I guess it increases my likelihood of remembering the things that I want to remember. Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm speaking in circles. Hopefully I'm making sense. The basic structure of my reading journal is I start the page with the tracking sticker, which I already finished one page. I just use a gel pen to doodle the cover. And then this is where I write down the date I finished the book. I don't keep track of when I start the book because I'm a very inconsistent reader. And if I, for example, take like 2 months to finish a book, just knowing the start date makes me feel pressured, and I kind of put it off more and more. So yeah, I don't track when I start the book, only when I finish it. I just use a gray marker to fill in the stars. I write the title and the author, and then the rest is just continuous writing. Oh, I guess this one just took 1 page. The rest is just free writing. And something about me is a lot of what I do is just based on intuition and whatever I feel like doing. So not everything that I do really has a rationale behind it. So it's kind of hard to explain like exactly what I write down and what I don't write down. I will try my best to explain though. So with a book that is nonfiction, for example, Walkable City, I write down facts and information that I find interesting. But my number one tip when reading nonfiction and journaling about it is to not confuse new information with things that you actually find interesting. If I'm reading a nonfiction book, it's likely that 90% of the information that I'm reading is new to me. And so what I found previously is that I would literally like write down every other sentence because I'm like, oh, this is new information and I want to remember it. And so it would take me months to finish a nonfiction book because everything was like notable to me. But yeah, nowadays I really question whether what I'm writing down is something that I find interesting rather than just something that's new, and it's like confounding my judgment of the information. I will also insert my opinions, connections to my life, things like that. Yeah, I think that's all I really have to say about nonfiction books. Oh, this was a fun one. This was a graphic design book, so I did draw some diagrams, but this isn't typical of what I do. This is a little bit of a mess. I just had a lot of blank spaces left, so I suppose I decided to write some notes from articles that I read. Oh, and I guess I ran out of space for Walkable City, so I continued it here. This is where I want to say, one issue that I have with my current setup is that I often read like 2 to 3 books at a time. And so I kind of always have to estimate how much space to leave for each book. And in this case, I ran out of space. So I think after I finish this notebook, I'm gonna probably move my reading journal to a traveler's notebook and use a bunch of these like thinner inserts. It's not gonna be 1 insert per book, but rather like I will have 3 inserts going on at the same time so that I can read and journal about the books in each of the inserts simultaneously without ever having to estimate how much space to leave. So that is my plan for after finishing this notebook. And then as for fiction books, I typically write down quotations that I like, my thoughts about the plot, the characters, what I would do differently from the characters, and I don't know, my predictions, things like that. So especially with fiction books, I have a lot of trouble remembering the characters, especially at the beginning where they are introducing all of the characters and the setting and just like building the story, and I get very overwhelmed. I don't know if it's my attention span that's a problem or a memory problem, I don't know. But what ends up happening is they might say John is a brunette plumber and never mention that he's a brunette plumber ever again. And if I like forget that piece of information and I don't remember how John relates to the main character or the story, I end up getting lost further in the story, and it's very hard to backtrack and figure out who John is. So what I started doing, actually in my first journal as well, here I made it as a sidebar, but yeah, I had a section for preliminary information. So like who Captain William Thomas Turner is and when the ship departed, just like these random bits of facts so that I can quickly refer to it if I forget something. I simplified my layout a lot from my previous journal, so nowadays if I want to, I just write it at the top. So for example, Lara is the mom in the story, and I drew a little heart to indicate that she is married to Joe, and Emily is married to Benny, or I guess in a relationship, I can't remember. So yeah, this really helps me just not get lost in the story, especially at the beginning. Usually at the end, I will also write down my overall thoughts about the book. I think up until this point, I didn't do much like color coding or anything like that because I really wanted to keep things simple. But yeah, starting here, I brought out my TWSBI fountain pen. It's inked up with a red, and this is how I am writing down all of the vocabulary and other, I guess, things that I want to bring to my attention. In my previous entries, I did write down new vocabulary and the definitions, but like just looking at this, I don't even know where it is because it is so blended in. So yeah, that is why I started using a red. Similar to what I said in the nonfiction section, I am very conscious about only noting down new vocabulary that I genuinely want to incorporate in my daily vocabulary. There are a lot of words that I don't know, and I'm always tempted to try to memorize everything, but realistically, I'm never going to come across it ever again, especially if it's like a super old and archaic phrase or something. That is really all I have to say about vocabulary. I have a few unfinished books here. This entry is super short because it was a short story. And then this was a collection of short stories, so I had a section for each short story. This is a funny thing. Sometimes I'll search up something and I feel like a visual demonstration would get the point across a lot better, so I would make a doodle like that, but it's not often. I also drew a question mark here because I didn't really understand this passage, and I actually still don't because I haven't gone back to look at it yet. If you know what this quotation means, let me know. It's like one of those things where I know the words and I'm reading the words, but I'm not able to parse the meaning, so yeah. Anyways, another little diagram. And this is the current book that I'm reading. What else can I say? So as for how I read and journal, I read through 3 different mediums. One is my Kobo Libra. This is an e-reader that I got last year. This is like a little stand-up case, and I love it. I can just press the buttons or swipe, and I can also highlight things. I can add notes, but it's a little bit laggy, so I don't really add notes over here. You can also directly look up the definition, which is very helpful. For the longest time, I was personally against getting an e-reader, but this has really increased my reading frequency, especially if I just have like 5 minutes and I don't want to get out this like chunky book. I can just open this up and read. Also really convenient for traveling as well. So yeah, if I'm reading on the e-reader, I will typically just like highlight things that I want to come back to and journal about it when I have time. Another way that I read is on my computer. I forgot the website, but I will put it on the screen here. But basically there is a collection of free classic books, and if it's on there, then I will just read it on the computer, sometimes on the walking pad or just sitting down. If I'm reading on the computer, I am not able to highlight on the website, so I usually have a Google Docs document open on another tab, and that is where I copy in the quotations and type out my thoughts. And then when I have time and when I'm not walking on the walking pad, I will write in my journal. So there's that. And then the most traditional way of reading is just with a normal book. I'm sure I will offend some people, but I do write in my books. If it's my personal book, I will write in it and underline. I have like little notes and like my reactions everywhere. I do use sticky notes to mark down things that I want to come back to and again write in my reading journal, but overall I don't do like color coding with sticky notes or my pens. In another life, I want to be one of those people who color codes their annotations, but that is too much for me, and I know that I will never be able to keep up with it, so I do things very, very simply. So apart from that, I think that is all I have to say for this video. It's very hard to make an interesting video about this when I don't really have much to my setup, and a lot of what I do is just what I feel like in the moment, so I don't really have any guidelines or rules that I can share. If you have any questions, do let me know, and I will see you next week. Bye and take care.